Syrian broadcaster.
We now cross over to Israel and talk with Professor Jeff Halper. He is an Israeli anthropologist and former head of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. Hope I've got that correct. And wonderful to have you on the show. Good morning, welcome. And let's go straight to the heart of the matter. And that is the neglect of Palestinians in Israel, which is fueling a killing spree. That sounds disastrous, serious, and very ominous indeed. Good morning.
Good morning. I think our connection isn't very good. I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you.
Are you having problems hearing me? The line does sound... Okay. Let's just take a break and try and reconnect with you. Will you just please stand by? Thank you.
Every 60 seconds, a silent pandemic claims the life of a child. Unsafe water is having a devastating global impact on health and livelihoods. Islamic Relief is at the forefront, providing clean and safe water to vulnerable communities around the world. Our tailored approach to sustainable water solutions enable families not just to survive, but to thrive, ensuring they stay healthy and safe. Give water, give life with Islamic Relief.
Looking to get your kick? Kiki's have now reopened on 235 Matthews Maiwa Road in Durban. Head on over for the Taste with Kick. We offer something scrumptious for everyone in the family. Wraps, chicken tikka, burgers, tender grills, mocktails, milkshakes, and so much more. Corporate and events catering available. Visit our social media pages for more info or call 031 209 0119. Kiki's, the Taste with Kick.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
8:51 exactly. Welcome back. Professor Jeff Halper, can you hear me loudly and clearly?
I can hear you better.
Okay, wonderful. We're talking about the deadly crime wave engulfing the Palestinian community in Israel. Analysts are saying that this must be urgently addressed after years of being ignored by the Israeli authorities. Your take on this situation, is it as bad as it is made out to be, or is it like in any community, where you're going to have criminality? We also understand that in Israel, the police solve approximately 71% of murders in the Jewish community, and only 23% are solved in Palestinian areas.
Yeah, well, that's right. The question is good in that you can't blame. There's no particular community that's criminal. It isn't that the Palestinian community in Israel has more criminals than the Jewish community or any other. But as you know well from South Africa, much crime is very much related to poverty and to alienation and to being segregated from the rest of society and isolated. And that's really the case here. It's not only that policing hasn't been done in the Arab community for many years. There's almost no police stations in the Arab community. There aren't very many Palestinian Israelis who fall into the Israeli police system. But more important than that is the fact that in terms of education and social welfare and infrastructure and communities and housing and all of the basic needs that people have, they haven't been fulfilled for the Arab community in Israel. And so the problem is, that Israelis are always thinking about crime. I guess other people do as well. Crime. How do you deal with crime? Well, you get more police and you lock people up in jail. That's the solution. But in fact, and therefore in Israel, the head of the security services and the police and the army have all been meeting together to figure out what to do and to bolster police force. But in fact, the real meeting should be between the Minister of Social Welfare, the Treasury, Education, Housing. In other words, those are the real problems. So it's true that there's a very high rate of crime in the Arab community, very large underworld even in the Arab community. But it reflects much more the poverty and alienation of that community than it does, the community itself.
So I hear you loudly and clearly. Obviously, it is socio-economic a problem tied in with the political situation in the country, and the Palestinians are finding themselves in an absolutely hopeless and helpless situation. Thus, like you said, you used a South African example, disenfranchised youth, uneducated, unemployed. And this is how you have the situation of poverty and high crime rates. It's truly, truly sad, is it not?
That's right.
Professor?
And,
Can you hear me? Did you get my
me?
question? I can hear you.
But I think I got the gist of the question. And that is, everything relates back to politics and so on. And, what's interesting is the Arab community in Israel. We call it the Arab community, not the Palestinian community, although I prefer to use the term Palestinian. But the Arab community in Israel has really attempted and tried over the years to integrate into Israeli society. I mean, there's even, the Islamic Party, the Israeli Islamic Party is a part of the government. So, the thrust of the Arab demands all these years has been for more integration. More integration in terms of communities, more social services, and, the fact that the Arabs in Israel are really segregated politically, as well as physically, as well as economically, of course, is really a problem. And I think it's systemic because, for Israelis that want Israel to be a Jewish state, it's always, the Palestinian community in Israel is always a threat. It's a demographic threat. And so, I think that's where the crime fund comes in. It's sort of an inevitable part of the general policy of segregation that has to do with trying to maintain Israel as a Jewish state, even though only about 70% of Israelis are actually Jews.
I'm wondering, analysts are saying that the Israeli government has neglected the Palestinian sector and, for example, barely set up police stations in the predominantly Palestinian villages and towns. There's also issues around financial bottlenecks in the police force, and this has often been cited as an excuse. Illegal weapons, gangs, and an extremely high crime rate are obviously the result. And the question obviously to be asked is, because of the high crime levels within the Palestinian sectors, is it in the Jewish or the Israelis' own self-interest to address these problems head-on so there isn't an overspill in their areas? Or is it so strictly controlled, the coming and going of Palestinian people, that there isn't a chance at all of that happening? That Palestinians infiltrate Jewish settlements and then go on a crime rampage?
I couldn't hear it very well, but I think the Palestinian communities in Israel are very segregated, and not only segregated, but you have a situation in which where you have Arab communities close to Israeli Jewish ones, like, for example, Jaffa, or Lida, or those kinds of communities, even Haifa and so on, Akko. There, you're having a process of gentrification because the Arab communities the Arab houses are really very beautiful. So that, in a sense, it's gentrification like you have in other parts of the world. The middle-class Jews are beginning to go into Arab communities and taking them over in terms of gentrifying them. And the Arabs are being then pushed out back into the poorer and more segregated cities outside of those mixed cities. So in a way, you've got a situation today that's even worse in that it's not meant against the gentry. The middle class people move into an Arab area with the good idea of integrating. We want to live with our Arab neighbors. The economics of it is that in the end they raise house prices to the point where the Arab population that's much poorer is forced out. Gentrification at the end turns out not to be a good thing. So there are policies that are intended against the Arab community, like the lack of resources. There are also policies and processes that aren't against them, but work against them, like gentrification. And then you have problems that have been unaddressed for years, like crime. So you really need a very, I don't think Israel's up for it, but you really need a complete reconsidering not only of policy towards the Arabs, but of the whole country. What is Israel? What is the place of citizens, including non-Jewish citizens in the country? And I think that's the overall big political question that all these other smaller questions depend on.
Professor Jeff Halper, I do apologize for this bad connection, but thank you indeed for your time, and I have no doubt that obviously the listeners did get a full view of what was discussed this morning with you, the neglect of Palestinians living in Israel, and the criminality that obviously seems to be flaring up and has been really a long-standing issue. Thank you once again, and go well. Have yourself a great day.
Thanks for having me on. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, you did. It is exactly 9:01.